Do the Dallas Cowboys find their new slot receiver in undrafted free agency? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Cowboys. Locked On Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. And joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, what's going on, sir?
I have some green haze happening behind me for everyone who's watching live on YouTube, so I apologize for that. I'm doing well. I'm excited. You know, we had a little mini camp last weekend. There's some players, vets playing with rookies, and one of us has a birthday today.
Yeah,
so
I'm officially washed. If I was running back, I'd be out of the league 5 years ago.
You're officially too old to play in the NFL, so the dream is now dead, Marcus. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
Happy birthday, buddy.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. So let's talk about some of the undrafted free agent receivers the Cowboys brought in. Two of them are absolutely fascinating, and we're going to start with Jalen Moreno-Cropper, who Cowboys gave a lot of money to, a lot of guaranteed money to. Probably the guy that had the best chance of being drafted. We saw him. I think it was in the East-West Shrine game. I like Jalen Cropper quite a bit. I think he's a pretty good player.
Yeah, he's really interesting, right? He's a little bit slight. He's definitely got some great speed, very smooth, quick to accelerate. The issue with him, and the reason that he's a slot receiver only, I would say, is he's small and he does not play through contact very well. You know, And I don't just necessarily mean that in the sense of like being able to fight through press, which I mean he struggles with that too. I'm talking about just in route, like physical corners, like will knock him off his route, disrupt his route, and he is just a guy that is, really not going to be the guy that you're going to put out as a Z or an X and try to fight through professional NFL corners a lot. Now, having said all that, if you could find a way to get this guy the football on the move in space, he's dangerous. He's really fast. He's got a good catch radius for a guy that's not huge. He's got he doesn't even have 31-inch arms. He doesn't even have 9-inch hands, but he catches the ball reliably. He catches the ball above his head. He can be a deep threat. He can run down the field without any too much issue. I mean, obviously we talked about the physicality problems and stuff, but if he can get past that, he can get a step on the corner. He has the kind of speed to get down the field and really get behind a defense. I just tend to pull back a little bit. It's very promising that both of these guys have very good speed, which is something the Cowboys have needed on their offense. But I think that this is a guy who, despite not having the kind of physical traits that you want for someone who's running routes on the outside, he has a very kind of we talk about this with rookies sometimes. He has a kind of complete game already, right? Because he can do like short, smoke route stuff. He can do, screens. He can do.
They ran jet sweeps like with him like crazy. And I was going to bring this up, but I don't know if you went back and watched his, I think it's 2019 tape. But I think he had like 300 rushing yards in 2019 because they were using him as a zone read quarterback. Like he's just really good with the ball in his hands. Yeah,
I mean, honestly, it just felt like Fresno was trying to do whatever they could to get him the football as often as they could. It does seem like there was a concerted effort, probably on his request, right? His senior year to try to play a little bit more outside, to try to kind of run some more of those routes just to show that he could do it. But I think, where he's really going to make his living is in the slot as a gadget guy, as a jet sweep guy, as a return man, potentially. Get this guy the ball in space, scheme him open some stuff, and watch the sparks fly. That's the kind of player I think you're getting here.
Yeah, man, he's explosive. And I know he ran a 4.40. I think he plays even faster than that. I mean, he is
The
wide.
1-5 split is really the more
Yeah.
indicative, I think, of
Yes.
what kind of speed we're talking about here.
It is just if the Cowboys want a slot receiver that can be a little bit more of a vertical guy that can make plays down the field or just kind of after the catch on drag routes and sweeps and jet sweeps and bubble screens. This is the type of guy they haven't had in a long time. And I know people say, well, what about Kevontae Turpin? As small as Cropper is, he still has like 20 pounds on Kevontae Turpin. And he's just a way more natural receiver.
Yeah.
And that's why I believe like he has a chance, I don't know, to make the roster this year, but like to be on the practice squad and maybe by year 2, like start challenging for some snaps.
Yeah, this is the kind of guy that likely is going to have a very good camp because he's the type of guy that a lot of his flaws will be covered up during training camp practices, right? They're not allowed to be terribly physical. So this guy is going to spend a lot of these shells and helmet practices getting open all day, like catching the ball and then looking incredible. I tend to agree that I think he probably needs a year just to kind of develop his body a little bit more. If he could just put on like 5 more pounds,
like get to 180. Like if you get to 180, then we're talking, right?
Yeah, and I honestly I think that opens up the possibility that you could potentially try to move him out more as a Z instead of just as a slot only.
Yeah.
With a little bit more muscle. But at 5'11" and 172, it's like he's just too slight to handle any kind of physicality at the college level, and certainly now at the NFL level. So that's why we're talking about an undrafted free agent and not, let's say, a 4th round pick or a 3rd round pick, right? Because
the good thing is it's not like he's this 5'7.5" slot receiver. Like he's over 5'11". So you would hope that with that frame, you could put on 7 to 8 pounds of muscle in a year or two and have him. He's going to play in the slot, but have him every once in a while move to the outside. I think that's what you're talking about here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's the height helps that there's more room to add to that frame, and then I think he has a skill set. Like I said, he can make plays above his head. Like he has a decent, despite not being incredibly long, he has a decent catch radius, and he's a reliable catcher. And because we've seen him, like he has speed to get down the field. He has the skill set to play a Z. The problem is that in route, like I mentioned, he gets beat up a lot, and it disrupts the timing of stuff, and that's not great in a West Coast scheme. So if you could find a way to get him get some more weight on him over the next year, just make him a little bit tougher through the route, like in route, then he could do a lot more. But as it stands right now, I think you probably have a guy who, if you needed to, you could throw out there and he could give you 5 to 10 snaps in the slot, maybe even give you some catches and maybe a big play or two, while he's kind of learning the rest of the positions. The real issue that we're going to have here is finding the roster mechanism to hold on to this guy, right? Because can he play special teams? Can he be a return guy? Is he going to make the game day roster? If he's not, is he going to be a game day inactive every week if you want him? Do you have to practice squad this guy? Those are going to be the kind of interesting parts of trying to hold on to Jalen Moreno-Cropper, just beyond the first round of cuts. Is exactly how is he going to fit on your roster without getting poached?
I think he can fit on the roster, and I'll explain how next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is $1,000 back in bonus bets. If your first bet doesn't win, there is no better place to bet on all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. We've got the NBA conference finals starting tonight. So go ahead, make your bets over there. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. Every dayers. Tomorrow on the show, Landon and I are going to kind of wrap up some of the minicamp news that we've gotten over the last few days. It's not a ton coming out of Cowboys camp. We do have some nuggets of information, so make sure you guys are tuning in for that. Landon, one of the reasons why I do think Moreno-Cropper could potentially make the roster is I think he does enough other things to warrant a spot. Like, just for example, it's pretty rare to have a receiver coming out of college with over 400 career rushing yards. Like, that's a pretty significant amount. On top of that, he does have some kick return experience, not a ton, but some 14 career returns, averaging over 21 yards per return. Now, the last couple of years, they didn't use him in that phase of the game because he was too valuable to the offense. But
he did some punt returning too, didn't he? Was he also a little bit of a punt returner?
I don't have numbers
here. I think I did read that he was as an underclassman was a returner, and he averaged something like 19.2 yards per return. So he has some skills there. But I agree. I think they probably took him off that because he was by far their most valuable offensive player.
He also averaged 29 yards per passing attempt in his college career.
Yeah.
Through 2 touchdowns. Like, I'm kind of joking, but like, if you want that Cedric Wilson number 4 receiver that can do a little bit of everything, the trick plays, the jet sweeps, the yards after the catch, the special team stuff, this might be the guy that could potentially fill that role.
Yeah. And look, I think that's another thing that we should talk about these two guys is I think both of these guys fit very clean roles for what the Cowboys like in their wide receivers, right? Like, this is a guy who could be a slot guy who could give you a whole bunch of different snaps in a lot of spots, like you talked about, like as far as a kick returner, punt returner, can do a couple of different things. He can be a gadget play guy for you. He can be a special packages guy if you want him to throw the football for some reason. And then, like if he can, I think what we've established is that he has a skill set that he can return punt and kicks. I think he was, obviously taken off of, like we said, for safety reasons. Cowboys won't have that same kind of restrictions because he's not, that valuable.
Not top 3 receiver for him, right?
Yeah. So I think the Cowboys will give him opportunities and looks there. If he could catch on there, I think the issue is that if he's going to make the team, then you probably don't have room for Turpin as well. Right.
Well, that's the thing. Like, if he could prove to be an adequate kick returner and punt returner, and help you on the other return stuff, and be able to give you something more on offense, it might be willing to make up for Turpin, who's just a better pure returner. Like, that's probably who he's going to have to beat out for that, spot on the roster.
Yeah. And hope that Turpin hasn't improved greatly as a receiver so that he kind of takes away his, or grown 2 inches. So I think, that's likely what we're about to see is, these two guys kind of battling out for that specific role.
The last thing that I'll say on Cropper is it's not like he is a 1-year wonder at Fresno State. Those kind of guys always make me a little bit nervous, right? The guys that just had 1 year production. It's like, okay, where were you the other 3 years? I mean, he had at least 500 yards from scrimmage all 4 years that he was on Fresno State. His role got bigger and bigger every single year. So I won't be surprised if he ends up making it. Frankly, I think he's the best undrafted free agent receiver they've signed since Cole Beasley. Was that back in 2012?
Yeah, and I think let's be clear. Like, he is a slot receiver. He is good. He probably is the best undrafted free agent receiver the Cowboys have signed since Cole Beasley. But he doesn't play his game similar to Cole Beasley at all.
No. They're different types of players.
Very different types of receivers. So, yeah, I agree. I think the thing that, again, that I keep coming back to with him is that he has a complete game. Like, you just don't have very many wide receivers who are ready to do 2 things that complement themselves so well in that the short game and the long game, and that he can do both, I think, very well. So, you may have to kind of scheme him a little bit, which that's not a problem for NFL coaches. But I think that he is a guy that if you wanted him to, if you needed him to, could come in immediately and be a part of a rotation in a wide receiver core that gets, a couple touches a game.
The guy that I wrote down in my notes, like my favorite guy, he plays like a little bit of a throwback, Titus Young, who the Lions drafted way back in the 2000s. Yeah. Somebody that just not physically imposing at all, but not this tiny slot receiver either, but can play down the field, can do stuff after the catch. You can put him in the backfield. I think if Moreno-Cropper can be something like that, I think that'd be a win.
I think this is a smaller, faster version of this player. But when I saw him running, just kind of that upright style and being in the slot, you don't really see a lot of 6-foot guys, or at least not like that. I thought he looked kind of like Patrick Creighton the way he was running.
Okay.
He was like running, that. Kind of upright,
Yeah.
But obviously he's a much faster player than Patrick Creighton was. So
I like him.
Yeah,
I'll
I
be
do too.
really interested to see, like, can he pass Ontario Drummond and Semi Fahoku and some of these other guys at the bottom of the roster? I won't be surprised at all. Let's get to our next receiver, Landon, who, man, he's a fascinating player. David Durden
really is.
from West Florida. If you checked out the piece on The Athletic, they do this article called Prospect X every year. The basically the best unknown player that you've never heard of. Durden was that player this year. I know it was really, really hard to find tape, and I'm sure you probably didn't find it, but what can you tell us about this receiver?
I mean, just a fascinating, situation, right? Like a guy that his his story is like so tied to his upbringing and where he's lived, where he grew up, and that sort of thing. So he grew up in a super super small town in Georgia. And a lot of this, obviously, I'm transcribed. I'm just from the article itself, right? Which was very fascinating. If you get a chance and you have an Athletic subscription, first of all, get an Athletic subscription.
Yeah.
Second of all, go read that story. It's fascinating to me because I kept on, and it's funny because he actually, in the second article, he actually mentioned his name. I kept on thinking about Noah Brown, right? Because he's this guy where I love, and I'm clearly the Cowboys love finding these athletic gems that are hidden away here. For Noah Brown, I understand he went to Ohio State, but he was hidden behind like other guys on that. So it was like kind of an unknown, but a guy who tested incredibly well. Same situation here. This is a guy who, coming out of high school, he got drafted by the Red Sox. Didn't even want to play baseball. Didn't really have any interest in baseball. Got invited to a kind of semi-formal tryout with the Red Sox scout, and hit the ball really well. So they decided to draft him. He was the whole time was sitting there thinking, I don't want to play baseball. I don't want to play baseball.
Yeah.
And just really felt like it was a complete mismatch. Ends up leaving and goes to Mercer for a couple of years, decides to transfer, takes a transfer year right before COVID hits, gets to his new school. COVID hits. He has to spend a miserable year, as he describes it, scrimmaging against his other team. By the way, his new team, his new school, West Florida. Never heard of it before. I lived in West Florida at one point. Never heard of the West Florida school. So it was one of these things where, like, he is now 3 years into a college football career, and he doesn't have a ton of experience. I mean, he has experience playing, small town college high school football, in which he played both ways. He played, I think they said in his senior state championship game, he played something like 130 out of 137 possible snaps in the game or something like that. So, like, this is a guy who absolutely loves football. I mean, just loves it. Obviously enough that he quit his baseball career because he wanted to go back and play more football. Goes out, has what's described as an absolute miserable. It goes out in what's described as a miserable day, but has an incredible pro day. And then, apparently the Cowboys had been keeping tabs on him for a long time, very quietly, apparently, up until
he got invited to the East West Shrine game, but he had a wrist injury, so he couldn't practice there. So it was like all these things that could have went wrong did for him.
Yeah. And so the sum total of it is that you've got this guy who, I mean, for those of us who are watching on YouTube, has a 9.6 RAS score as a wide receiver. He's an absolute, just a dominant physical presence as a wide receiver. He's 6'1", 204, and he ran a 4.45 with a 1.55 split. The guy can run, and you watch it on film too. Like, when you see his highlights, it is the typical man amongst boys. I mean, he literally looks like a grown man, like amongst middle school kids.
Really quickly on the athletic testing, he ran a 4.46 with a 37-inch vertical and a 10.7 broad. In the cold, it was 33 degrees in the rain outside. Okay, so he's an even better athlete than this 9.6 RAS. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, and I think that's honestly, all of this comes down to, like, how much can you trust your eyes? Like, because everything looks right. Like, he dominated lower competition. The problem is that you just don't have any tape at all of him playing anything above this, so you'd love to have seen him make it to the Shrine Game. Obviously, the wrist didn't work out. You'd love to have seen him make it to the Senior Bowl, and I think he was also in consideration for the Senior Bowl, and then just missed the cut, if I'm not mistaken. So, this is a guy who very cleanly fits in that role. We talked about clean transcribing. Very cleanly fits in that role of the down roster developmental wide receiver who is a physical presence who can play special teams right away. He played a ton of special team snaps in college. He's big, tough, physical. I think there's going to be no problems with seeing him run down and cover kicks. I think he has some return ability as well. This guy is
24 yards per kick return and like 19 yards per punt return in his career.
This guy is it's fascinating to me because he's a physical presence, so there's upside there, but it's not like he hasn't played football or that he's only played a little bit of football. He's played 4 full years of college football and got a very large target share there at West Florida, I'm sure. So it's not like he hasn't, been put out there or been playing a lot of football. He has. It's just we can't trust our eyes on any of this tape. We have to see what he does against higher levels of competition. Obviously, many teams were willing to take a gamble on that athleticism and to bring him into a mini camp. I honestly can't wait to see what he does at training camp.
We've seen this type of player work out several times in the NFL. I'm going to give you an example from the Cowboys history, and then one from somebody that Mike McCarthy would happen to know pretty well when we get back. All right, Landon, I got to tell you, when I was reading this story of David Durden in The Athletic, the name that kept popping into my head was Adam Thielen, who went to Minnesota State, which I had never heard of Minnesota State before. He didn't go to any of the All-Star games, wasn't invited to the Combine, but I think he walked on to Minnesota's Pro Day, not Minnesota State's Pro Day, Minnesota's Pro Day, and had this ridiculous workout. Minnesota signs him as an undrafted free agent. And 3 years after they signed him, I think by the age of 26, he's starting and he has a big season. I won't be surprised if David Durden is kind of like that. Somebody who just kind of got lost in the shuffle a little bit, but when you're that big and athletic and you just, who knows? I wouldn't be surprised. The other guy that we should mention, another pretty recent Cowboy, Miles Austin went to Monmouth State or Monmouth, I think, right? And he had
Monmouth State.
And he had this ridiculous workout, but nobody had really ever heard of Miles Austin. What did Miles Austin do his first year in training camp? Was really good on special teams, made a couple flash plays in the receiving game, and about 2-3 years later, he's one of the best receivers in football. So it happened.
Only reason the Cowboys even found Miles Austin was because he went to Jason Garrett's dad's house to work out, I mean, this, sometimes these guys, we talk about planet theory, but at certain positions like wide receiver, there's a lot more of these guys who are physically capable of doing the job than we kind of realize, right?
Yes.
I think this is a situation where this is a guy who can just needs to develop a little bit more. I tweeted out last night that somebody described, I think it was his former baseball coach, said David Durden only knows one speed. And they were talking about how he ran through, first base on every single spring training rep, and I commented that that's a great comment on his effort, but it's also a great criticism on his route running because he just runs fast like the whole time. He doesn't have any subtlety to his game. I think, like I said, there is a lot of use in having a guy like this on your team, even as a down roster part of your unit, because he can fill in a lot of roles as a special teamer. I mean, more so even than Cropper. This guy is I think can play a whole bunch of different stuff. And can be a gunner, can do what you need him to do. And then as he's developing, I mean, the upside potential here is immense. He could definitely be an outside deep threat type player. He has incredible hands. He's really tracks the ball well. That I think that goes back to his baseball, his background in baseball. So I just think this is a guy that is, a freak small town athlete who is unlike anything that small town had ever seen, but he just didn't know how to play the game in order to kind of be a huge recruit, to go to a big college and then go get a bunch of scouts at his pro day. That it just didn't happen for him.
It does feel like the wide receiver position of all the positions in the NFL has the most of these guys that just show up out of nowhere, right? Or guys that just have very limited football experience. I'll give you another one. I remember when Chris Hogan came into the league at like age 27, who was a lacrosse player, right? And Bill Belichick saw that athleticism and was like, we can figure it out. So again, I'm not saying that he's going to become the next Chris Hogan or Miles Austin or Adam Thielen,
but it's realistic that these guys get lost, right?
Yes,
like,
yes.
Think about like, and all, not to get into too deep into it, but think about 7-on-7 camps, like in the development of that. What that means is that more and more of these kids, way more than when I was in high school or when the previous generations, more and more of these kids are getting more and more reps of running routes with quarterbacks, understanding the nuance of route running. That means there is a much, much larger pool of kids to choose from that have skill sets of wide receivers. And what does that mean? That there are more kids underneath those kids who didn't get the chance to go to these camps, who didn't get that opportunity, who are also being hidden by just the pure mass of available wide receiver bodies in the high school to college pipeline.
The other thing that I'll say about him, just to quickly on his athleticism, is the list of receivers in this class that were over 200 pounds and ran a sub 4.5 was incredibly small. Like I'm looking at Dane's draft guide right now, and the only guy that was inside the top, I'm looking at right now, the top 30 receivers that hit those marks was Jonathan Mingo, who was a second round pick, who doesn't really know how to play football yet either, right? Like the Panthers took him high in the second round because there's just not many of those guys floating around out there. So he obviously doesn't need to be Jonathan Mingo, but I won't be surprised if the Cowboys stash him on the practice squad for a year and say, let's see what he looks like a year from now after being in an NFL weight room and learning how to run routes. Maybe they have something here. I won't be surprised at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just the attitude, the effort of this kid just seems like a classic small town, hardworking kid. So if it's just about effort, if it's just about hard work, I feel pretty confident this guy's going to make it.
If nothing else, it's going to give us two really fun receivers to watch during the training camp process, during preseason. And we're going to obviously have Simi Fahoku and all the other guys that, Jalen Tolbert, about two more guys to keep on your radar. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every day. Again, every day or tomorrow we'll be back on the show talking about some minicamp notes. Be sure to tune in for that. You can go follow the show on YouTube, Locked On Cowboys over there. Follow Landon at Landon or at McCool BCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosher. We'll see you guys next time.